Welcome to Sisters in Crime Australia and Murder Mondays, where authors talk about their crime craft. I'm Karina Kilmore, a debut crime writer, a journalist and a national convener for Sisters in Crime, and we've been celebrating women's crime writing since 1991. Before I introduce Tara Moss, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Tara, Sisters in Crime is so pleased to have you join us today, and a big welcome back to Australia. You've been part of our sisterhood since you won the Scarlet Stiletto Youth Award in 1998. That helped set you on your way. By the next year, you had won second prize in the overall competition and had written Fetish, the first novel in your 6-part Stiletto series. You now have 13 books under your belt, including 2 best-selling non-fiction books. Your latest series features Billy Walker, a female private investigator, walking the mean streets of Sydney in 1946. She's been described as staunchly feminist, fast-driving, fast-talking, and a champagne-swilling Nazi hunter. But that doesn't pay justice to her wonderful fashions or that she darns her own stockings. And no doubt encouraged by your own passion for making vintage clothing. Your writing has also involved some extreme research, including studying and earning your own private investigator credentials and starting a PhD at the University of Sydney. During the past 2 decades, you've also hosted TV shows, made radio documentaries, been an advocate for human rights and the rights of women, children and people with disabilities. And add to that, being a UNICEF Australia Goodwill Ambassador and UNICEF Australia's National Ambassador for Child Survival. Welcome, Tara. Before we get to the questions, can you please give us your elevator pitch for your latest novel, The War Widow?
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, and hello to all the sisters out there. Sisters in Crime make a big difference in promoting women's work and this wonderful genre. So The War Widow is the first in my Billy Walker mysteries. It has been described by Hank Philippi Ryan, who's won 5 Agatha Awards, as important feminist noir, and it is a direct response to the hard-boiled genre and noir. So if you love hard-boiled and you think it's about time to see some of the gender tropes in that genre subverted, this is the series for you. Billy Walker, as you mentioned, has been described as a staunchly feminist, champagne-swilling, fast-driving Nazi hunter, and I think that's pretty apt.
That's great. Okay, let's get to our questions. What's the hardest part about writing a novel?
I love being my own boss, but I think it's also sometimes the hardest part of being a writer because it's very isolating. You have to stay very motivated and you need to do so without much support at all. So you spend a lot of time by yourself.
Yeah. Helps
if you're an introvert.
How much of you is in one of your characters?
There's a lot of me in Billy Walker,
yes.
And I have had that pointed out to me. I think, though, the same is true for Mac Vanderwall, who is in my contemporary crime series. She's been described as a feminist icon sort of after the fact. I don't think I knew that's what I was writing at the time, though. But what you see as a continuing theme in all of my work over the last 21 years is central female characters, that women are centered in the stories, and that the women have agency and they kick a lot of ass. So yeah. I'd like to think I have some relationship to those kinds of characteristics as well. And basically I'd love to see Pandora English, Billy Walker and Mac Vanderwall get together at a bar somewhere, because I think they get on like a house on fire. And I want to be part of that girl gang.
Yeah. Why is crime so appealing as a genre?
Look, I think there are lots of reasons for this. On the more serious side, crime as a genre allows you to explore issues that are social justice issues, class issues, violence against women, human rights issues. It places you really well to look at some of the most pressing problems of society. And I think that's even how the noir and hardboiled genre really developed, was to take it out of the earlier kind of look at class and actually talk about what a lot of ordinary people were going through and what kind of dangers they were experiencing and how they were resilient and struggling and pushing through. So noir and hardboiled are really excellent areas of the crime genre for really looking at that gritty, tough, and violent side of human nature. It's also a lot of fun to write, because if you're like me, you enjoy action sequences, you enjoy suspense, and I want to be able to convey that to readers while also exploring these issues that mean a lot to me personally, that I'm passionate about in my, my nonfiction and also in my human rights work. So I see it as a perfect marriage of the things I care about, but also the things I want to explore in my entertainment and my downtime.
Yeah, fabulous. What's the scariest thing in your novel?
Well, I think you can't get scarier than the real circumstances that people found themselves faced with in World War II, with the Holocaust, with human rights abuses, and also that immediate post-war period where people returned back to Australia. And The War Widow is set in Sydney, it's set in Australia. And you have ordinary citizens dealing with this extraordinary political and social change. Some of them becoming pariahs, either because they have facial difference due to scarring and disability, or because they're a woman and they want women to get back in the kitchen after having been, instrumental in the war effort. And Billy Walker, my central heroine, is one of those characters. She's seen a lot. She's come back to Australia. The newsrooms don't want her. They want to only have the men in the newsrooms, and they say, ladies, go back home and cook for your husbands. But she doesn't have one to cook for, and she wouldn't be doing that anyway.
No.
She's not that kind of woman. So she restarts her late father's investigation agency and jumps into that world. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of pushback because they don't appreciate women who aren't making room for returned soldiers, which was the view at the time, and they don't also appreciate widows, which was one of the reasons this title change was important to me, because widows were seen as a threat. A woman needed to be attached to a man, or someone even say, a man needed to be responsible for her actions. Otherwise, she's quite threatening. And Billy is, not attached. She's a widow with uncertain marital status, and that makes her very suspicious to many people.
Yeah, and just tell us about the title change, Tara.
Yeah, so this book came out as Dead Man's Switch in October last year, and the wonderful Indigenous lawyer and author Larissa Brandt launched the book, which was a real honor. And then down the track, as it was getting interest overseas, we really felt that focusing more on Billy herself rather than this more kind of crime title, this noir title, would be important because she's such a central character in this. Yeah. Sydney itself as a city is a character, but Billy really is what pushes the plot along with her host of wonderful colleagues like Shyla, the Wiradjuri woman from Australia, the Indigenous woman who is really central in the plot as well. So we felt that a title that was about Billy Walker would be helpful, and also a title that speaks to the period, so hence the word war in there, and focusing on women's experiences of being widows and being pariahs because they've lost someone. I see it as a continuation of the feminist themes and an opportunity to subvert the stereotypes around what a widow or war widow would be like, because of course many people experience that after World War II, and in fact any conflict anywhere in the world, there's a lot of widows and a lot of people who lose loved ones. And the idea that there can be an encompassing stereotype about that person. They're going to be a wallflower dressed in black, and that's, that is just not accurate. And I think Billy blasts that stereotype to pieces with her red lipstick and her fighting red and her attitude and her abilities. So I love that about her, and I think it works well with the new title.
Yeah. What research did you do for your latest novel?
Well, I've done a lot of research over the years, as you know. I got my PI credentials, so that was helpful for writing a private investigator character. Having said that, Billy Walker wasn't even needing to get her PI credentials in 1946 because they hadn't established that. You could kind of be anyone and start a PI investigation agency at the time. The only thing you couldn't do is call yourself a detective. So all those classic noir films I love where they call them private detectives, you actually couldn't use that term in Australia unless you were a police detective. So that was quite interesting to discover. I did a lot of hands-on research in terms of being in the locations in the book. All the locations in the War Widow are real places in Sydney and New South Wales in the Blue Mountains. There's a Hydro Majestic, there's Daking House near Central Station, and in fact the Central Railway Station as well features. Daking House is where she has her private investigation agency. And you can stand in the street and like look up at her window where she stands out there and smokes her lucky strikes on smoking days, as she calls them. So all of the locations are real apart from the dancers, which is a direct reference to Raymond Chandler's work. Which, I mean, we all say, if you love noir and hardboiled, you're going to say Chandler's an influence. He is, but I also wonder, I think he'd like Billy Walker and he'd like what I'm doing, but I am messing with the genre he helped put his stamp in. He helped create, really, as the father of hardboiled, along with Dashiell Hammett. I think they were both quite interested in inequality, but maybe didn't look at it from a gender perspective, so they might actually appreciate what's been done here, specifically with my subverting the common roles that are in classic noir.
Yeah.
I really got involved in the research of the period. It's also dedicated to my Oma and Opa who survived World War II. They had me really growing up with stories from the period. So World War II and the 1940s have been a period that I've kind of lived with stories of through my life and researched and been fascinated with. And if we have time for me to tell that quick story, my Opa, he was... when the Nazis occupied Holland, my Oma and Opa were there with young kids, and my Opa was taken by force by the Nazis and put into slave labor by them in a work camp in Berlin in a munitions factory. And my Oma, who had small kids with him at the time, used to cycle across Holland to Berlin, smuggling flour and sugar in the hollows of her bicycle. And this would take days, as you can imagine. And she would cycle through all these checkpoints, and she'd give him those ingredients because he was a baker by trade. And he used those ingredients to bake bread in the munitions ovens to bribe the foreman. And that is how he eventually got his day pass, by bribing the foreman, and that's how he escaped the Nazis. So I grew up with these stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and that's why the War Widow is dedicated to them. And it's a focus in this series to look at ordinary people as opposed to the politicians and generals and, you know, high-ranking people that we generally almost exclusively hear about.
Yeah, that's a great story. What is your writing routine?
When I am writing a book, I'm not always writing. Sometimes I'm devising a book, plotting a book, and a lot of that's going to happen in my head with my reading and my stacks of, you know, research materials. There's the Daking House blueprint.
Oh, yes, it is too.
So I'm going to spend a lot of time doing the research. I'm going to do a lot of time planning and just learning about a period, learning what I want to do. And then when I'm actually writing, I generally aim for 1,000 words a day. I think that's a wonderful amount to try to aim for. And in reality, some days you get 300 or less because it's like getting blood from a stone. And other days you might get 3,000 words because it's... So I try not to be too hard on myself when I have those days when the writing doesn't flow. And then when the writing is flowing, it usually makes up for it. So I aim for 1,000 words a day. And for the first 15 years or so of writing books, I used Word doc exclusively. I really didn't like any of the bells and whistles. It was just very basic. And now I swear by Scrivener. It's a program that allows me at the click of a button to blank out the rest of my desktop, focus right on the page, and it does a lot of beautiful auto-saving, as all good programs should, but also helps me keep track of the word count and the project length, the length I'm going for, and how many days I have left till my deadline. And just those simple things help me. So that's why I've been using Scrivener for the last maybe 6 years or so.
Yeah.
Last 3 years.
Wow, terrific. What's the best way to dig yourself out of a bad plot hole?
Go for a walk. Go for a walk and let what you know simmer in the background for a little while without pressing too aggressively to pull it out, if that makes sense. I think for me, I write a lot from the subconscious. I load my mind up with everything I feel like I'm going to need to know. Hence, I did 2 years of research on the War Widow before I started, before I was really very far into the writing. A lot of that time was just researching and not very much writing. But then by the time I'm on the page, things will come out that I'm not even consciously aware I'm going to write. And I think that comes from having loaded the information in and letting the subconscious guide me a little bit, letting the natural flow, the organic process take over a little bit. That isn't to say you shouldn't plan, because you should, but let that organic process be part of your planning and be flexible in terms of what's going to change along the way.
Yeah, great advice. Do you start with the plot or the character or something else?
Always the character for me, and the plot follows close behind, because I like to imagine what would happen if these two characters intersected. What would result from that coming together? Is it going to be something terrible? Is it going to be something earth-shattering or sexy and romantic, or is it going to be heartbreaking? Is it going to be violent, or all of the above? I want to think about those two characters and what extraordinary circumstances I can put them into.
Yeah, terrific. Good question to follow up with. How do you write about violence?
How? Well, I write about violence often. Quite often, yes. For a person who's, I think, pretty nice, and Canadian-born, we tend to be quite nice people generally as well. For a nice person, I enjoy violence very much in a fictional form. I enjoy writing about it because it's about those stakes of life and death that are a reality in our world. So anyone who's experienced loss, which I have, we're going to be exploring life and death situations. We're going to be thinking on mortality and thinking around violence and trauma. And that's why I am drawn to this genre and drawn to discussing these issues in my advocacy work as well. When I write about violence, I try to find a level that I feel is appropriate to the story I want to tell. I probably think about the audience as well, but that's a little bit secondary, which isn't to put down the importance of the audience, because they're absolutely vital and important. But I guess I try to get a feeling myself for what that story can take, what it needs, and what is going to be the most effective when you're reading it later. I need to be moved as the reader, as the writer, in order for the reader to be moved. So I try to be quite honest with myself about, how authentic does this feel? How far am I going? Am I going too far? Is it going to be putting someone off who might otherwise get a lot from this story? Or is it challenging? And I want it to be challenging. I don't want it to be a walk in the park. And I enjoy teacup mysteries, but I don't often read them, and I certainly don't write them. So if it's a teacup mystery, that teacup's going to get smashed if you're reading my books. That's just the style that I have. It doesn't make it better or worse or more valid than someone else's writing style. I am very much a how-done-it rather than a who-done-it person. There's question and suspense and uncertainty all the way through my books, but the primary thing isn't kind of the puzzle. I really admire people who write like that, but for me, it's going to be the how, it's going to be the resilience, it's going to be the action. And I'm told my writing is very filmic. So for me, the action sequences and the violence is actually very easy to write, because I can feel it, I can see it, again, because I put in that work beforehand about the characters. And once I know those characters, I know what's going to happen when they come together, and it's going to be explosive.
Yeah, fabulous. How important is place in your writing?
It's hugely important. With The War Widow, the locations in Sydney are like a character. You know, the city of Sydney in 1946 is like a real living organism, a real character in this book. So location's important, particularly with historical fiction like this, because there are real locations that you can shine a light on that are very often overlooked in the modern day. I really appreciate Art Deco and historical architecture and attempts to preserve and look after these great pieces of history. And I think that's one really good reason to write about those places, is you kind of keep them alive in the retelling. So I think location's very important. In my Mac Vanderwall series, I had her going to multiple countries. There was a lot of Sydney again in that series, and Melbourne as well. I don't think there was any Blue Mountains, but Blue Mountains is a great place for historical locations. And she went off to Hong Kong, she went off to Vancouver, she went off to Barcelona, and those locations, again, were very rich and interesting to write about. So, yeah, I think location makes a huge difference.
Yeah. How do you write about diverse communities?
Hopefully with sensitivity. I think it's enormously important to include the diversity of the world in your work. For me, that means being more focused than I was previously on making sure there's more racial diversity and also disability shown in my work. I think there was probably limited racial diversity in my Mac series. There were several kind of immigrant communities, but there were no Indigenous characters, for example. And also diverse sexuality and gender wasn't very well represented in the Mac series. In fact, there were characters that I imagined as bisexual, but you never actually had a scene that showed it overtly enough. And same with my Pandora English series. So that's something I want to improve in future books. The last 6 years I've been much better with it, with my nonfiction, and now with this Billy Walker series. You've got this incredible number of people who've come back from the war with injuries and disabilities, and they feature as a really normal part of Sydney society in that period. So I'm really pleased that that is very visible in this series. And there's also, of course, Shyla and these incredible Aboriginal girls in the book who are strong and self-reliant and push the plot along and are very important. So I think I'm getting better at it, but you do need to do it with some level of sensitivity and awareness. And for that reason, I hired sensitivity readers. I spoke to my Indigenous friends, my friends who are First Nations women, and managed to get them to kind of read sections or give me advice, or, and I want to pay for that as advice as well. So I think sensitivity readers are a natural extension of researching well. So I'm going to continue to do that in future books as well.
Oh, fabulous. Tell us something not in your book about your main character.
Would that be giving too much away? Something not in the book about the main character. I'm not sure. There's a lot in the book about her quirks. And the things I know about her that are huge and blaring are things that will be revealed in the book I'm currently writing, which is the follow-up. So I think I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you, and I really don't want to do that.
Don't kill us.
The sister is watching today.
Yeah, you can pass on that one, Tara.
Like an espionage secret.
Yeah, that's right. How many drafts do you do? How many drafts do you write before handing it in?
I lose track. I would say that I don't think of it in full drafts until I've handed it in. So there's a constant process of revision, addition, revision happening throughout the writing process for me. I've never been able to write a book in a year. It always takes longer than that. So, don't look to me for a fast way to write a novel. But I'd say after 21 years and 13 bestsellers, I do something right. It's just I do it in my own way, and I've always loved the idea of being able to know exactly what I'm going to write before I write it, because I just think I could be so much more efficient in my writing. It just doesn't seem to work that way for me. So drafts are really, there's too many changes to really look at it as full drafts. I think of it more as a lump of clay that I'm turning into a sculpture, and I mold it and shape it until I feel like it's pretty close, and then I let someone else see it. So the first thing is probably going to be the publisher wanting to look at if there's any structural edit needed. Usually there's like a couple of minor suggestions, sometimes none at all. Then the next process is going to be that line edit. But really it's the tail end of the experience for me. I don't work sending work along the way or chapter by chapter. And as I've become busier and more in demand, which is great, I have had to send things slightly more rough than I would like. So it's not, you know, I could go, oh, if I could have 6 more months to just tinker with this, I will often have to just send it on. But again, the sculpture's pretty much finished at that stage. We're not going to change the position of the limbs or anything by then, but those details are going to be refined further once there's fresh eyes on it. And that's where editors are incredibly important to give that, you know, to point out something you might have overlooked because you've stared at it for a year and a half by yourself.
Yeah. And our last question for today, how would you get away with murder?
Well, again, if I told you, I'd have to... Look, poison is a classic for a reason, but forensics are getting pretty good these days. I guess it's not giving too much away to mention that in The War Widow, at some point, Billy Walker's trying to figure out where a body would be disappeared in Australia if someone wanted to get rid of somebody. And a fellow at the morgue in 1946 says 2 things. He says, if it goes into the harbor, it can be a long time before it's found, and it'll be in very poor condition, so it's hard to tell the cause of death, particularly in 1946. Maybe today, a little easier, but still could be tricky, depending on how much time has elapsed. But eventually, probably it will be found, unless it's weighed down quite well. This is quite dark, isn't it? And the other possibility is somewhere in the outback. Or the Blue Mountains, where it's hard to tell after a few weeks if someone was pushed off that cliff or even stabbed before they fell, or if they had an unfortunate accident. So that's my very dark advice for you.
Yeah.
And please only apply it to fiction, please.
Thank you, Tara. And I'll just let everyone know you're coming from the Blue Mountains today. Where you are in Australia. That's right. Thank you for being with us on Murder Mondays. It's been an honour to have you, and look forward to your next book. Thank you very much, Tara.
Thank you, sisters, and right on.